100. It's a nice round number, a number that makes you feel good, and it's the number of days we've currently find ourselves into our 150-day journey. The journey, in case you missed it, is a journey of a professional Terraria builder taking on Calamity's death mode. It's had its highs, its lows, and its really highs. And it's really been a pretty crazy and interesting journey, so if you missed any of it, feel free to check out some of my previous episodes. For now, let's continue from where we left off in our last expedition. I woke up the next morning and my head was pounding. Clearly, that odd mushroom that I had eaten, that thing, while it had given me the creative juices I needed to do some building, had some pretty nasty side effects. The last thing that I could remember was defeating the Plaguebringer, and then hearing that all familiar sound. But today was going to be different. Today was going to be the day that we finally are going to go track down the sources of those sounds that are coming from the dungeon, even if it kills me. But since my memory was still a bit hazy, the best thing to do was to retrace my steps. So I went back to the jungle, explored my jungle huts, but found nothing. So the only thing I could think to do was to seek answers from the last person, or thing, that saw me before the incident. It was time to have a quick chat with the Plaguebringer once again, and find out just exactly what that sound was. Now, he certainly seemed a little apprehensive to chat, so I figured I should ask him a little louder this time. But despite beating him up and down the arena, he still didn't seem very cooperative. So I decided to ask him again, and again, and again, and again. And I asked him an innumerable amount of times until finally I realized I had undertaken a futile exercise. Bruh. This guy, he clearly didn't have the answers I was looking for. That sound that was echoing from the dungeon would remain a mystery, at least for now. But while this thorough examination didn't provide me the answer that I was looking for, it did yield some other interesting results, specifically in the form of this new rogue weapon, the malachite. It's a weapon that throws various projectiles, has very solid damage, and even a unique secondary ability. But perhaps most importantly, it has absolutely insane speed. And as you know, there's really only one thing to do when you find yourself a new and interesting weapon. So I headed off to a new testing ground where I would take on the old one's army and see what this thing could do. And without even using any turrets or even specific materials or loadouts, I absolutely carved my way through this entire event on the very first try. Needless to say, this malachite thing, yeah, it's going to see a lot of action in the coming days. But for now, I've got two immediate next steps to contend with. First, I have to figure out what the next boss is that I'm going to have to take down. In this case, it was going to be a new boss that I had absolutely zero experience with, the Ravager. And all I really needed to do was to craft this death whistle so I could summon him when the time was right. The second thing to contend with on my list was to create some new potions. Now this is because during the course of our exploits, a number of new NPCs have moved in, and some of them are honestly selling some pretty interesting things. So some of these potions that are being sold actually have some new effects I've never seen, and others simply just combine a variety of effects into one. Either way, an absolute must in Calamity's death mode. So with my death whistle, my new potions, and my malachite in hand, I headed off to my arena to take on the Ravager and see what I was made of. But as it turns out, in the eyes of the Ravager, I am but a mere meat popsicle. For now, I'm simply going to chalk this up to being a totally new experience. He's really not that bad of a fight, and I'm mostly having issues with those pillars that he shoots at you more than anything else he's doing. So if we can avoid those, I think we're good. So let's give this another shot and just be mindful of those walls. Yeah, that's a lot better. With the Ravager defeated, I barely had time to catch my breath and look through my very mediocre loot before a few of you fine folks in the community began informing me that, while I'm just wasting my time, all this boss fighting I've been doing up until now had effectively been pointless. Instead, I was informed that the real challenge starts after you take on the lunatic cultists. And as luck would have it, look at who's next on our list. Now, while the cultists may act as gatekeepers here, I was also a little bit curious to know, are these hooded individuals responsible for the clicking sound we've been hearing all this time? I wasn't really sure, but I was certainly going to find out. So I headed off to the dungeon to ask some serious questions. And just like that, the cultist was defeated, and I was immediately thrown into another challenge that most Terraria players hope to avoid. The Celestial Pillars were now active, and I was in range of what I consider to be the worst of them all, the Solar Pillar. These guys are fast, hit really hard, and are pretty tanky, and while I fought off a few enemies, I quickly realized I need to make my way home before anything bad happened. Once home, I dropped in the Ancient Manipulator alongside my crafting stations and headed off to deal with my next objective. Dealing with what is arguably the easiest and probably the most useful of the pillars, the Stardust Pillar. Now, you may not agree, but in my opinion, the Stardust Pillar has a number of things going for it. First, the pillar really only has one annoying enemy, which is the Flow Invader. Second, you can farm these star cells by killing most, but not all of them, so that they can respawn quickly and you just keep farming them. And third, and probably most importantly, once you defeat this pillar, you get the Stardust Dragon Summon, which is easily one of my favorites. Now you might be thinking, but Tommy, you're playing Rogue, and that is true, but I'm not gonna lie, I struggled to resist the temptation to use this summon. In its place, however, I made the Star of Destruction, which fires this massive mine that explodes into a bunch of bolts, which, while it's quite slow, is definitely going to be a fun weapon to use. And if you're deciding to play Rogue, I highly recommend you give it a shot. From there, I just continued to fight through each pillar as efficiently as I could. I took on the Nebula Pillar with the extremely annoying Nebula Floaters without too much trouble. And then I made my way to the Vortex Pillar and dealt a swift and merciful death to all the bugs it could throw at me. Then finally, I carefully carved up the Solar Pillar with almost no issues at all. And just like that, with the 4 Celestial Pillars defeated, there was only inevitability waiting for me. Moonlord was coming, and I was ready. Or so I thought. Turns out he's just a little bit more challenging than I'm used to. But this is simply an unexpected setback. Nothing major. So I headed back and tried again. But unfortunately, I quickly got put in my place. And then this happened again, and again. Now, considering how often I have beaten this boss, this was not going well, and I fully blame Death Mode's difficulty. So given my struggles, I decided to do something else and settled on farming Astrum Deus. And honestly, I wasn't even looking for any specific items, unless that is there were items called my confidence or my dignity. But just as I felt like I was going to hit a new low, sometimes the universe just has a way of working out, and I actually ended up finding something kind of useful. The Regulus Riot. Now, I wasn't really sure if this would make much of a difference, but along with a rotation of other solid rogue weapons, I was hoping this would give me the edge I needed to take on Moonlord. And honestly, there was really only one way to find out. And with a few final attacks landing, Moonlord went down like a ton of bricks. I was now the Champion of Terraria. Well, at least according to this in-game notification. The reality was, this journey was truly just beginning. What I did also know, however, was that with the Moonlord defeated, I would now have access to a host of new materials, weapons, and armors. So I mined out this Luminite planetoid and then crafted 2 very, very interesting looking weapons. First one, the elemental disc, and the second one, the lunar kunai. Both of them with very good damage, tons and tons of projectiles, and incredible speed. But it was the elemental disc in particular with its speed and bright colors that really reminded me of something. A boss I hadn't previously given a fair shake after it slapped me across the cosmos. The Empress of Light. I decided with all the excessive power-ups, it might be a good time to give her another shot. So I headed off to the hallowed biome and said hello. It wasn't even close. The power-ups from my journey were showing just how strong I had become, and I'm realizing at this point I needed to test this power against something a bit more difficult, something new. And that's when I saw my next step towards that goal, the Profane Guardian. I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I felt confidence oozing out of every pore. I crafted the Profane Shard, headed to my arena, and tested out just how strong I had become. But I was put in my place. Rather swiftly, and this actually happened several times. But despite my multiple failures, I somehow felt that this boss was still within my reach. I just need to focus and lock in. And with a deep breath, this is precisely what I aim to do. And with the final blows landing, my revenge was fulfilled. The Profane Guardian was no more. But just as I was about to celebrate, I heard it, louder than ever before. I made my way towards the dungeon, not really sure what I would find. When I arrived, I searched high and low, I fought off a variety of enemies, and really couldn't locate the source of the sound. It felt like nothing was really different. I explored every nook and cranny, and still nothing. And right as I was going to give up, I found my way to a narrow corridor in the bottom corner of the dungeon. This unassuming passage opened up into this arena with an ominous eye built into the background. I wasn't exactly sure what this was, but I was sure that this was the source of the sound, and I had a bad feeling that there was more here than met the eye. But getting to the bottom of this would have to wait until the next time.